So that was Secretary East, who handles Malaysia, talking about the outcomes and what transpired during this two-day visit. Currently, as he said, the Prime Minister is meeting with the CEOs and putting out that the two leaders over yesterday and today had productive meetings. Of course, there was warm exchange. We know how the Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim went to the airport to receive the Prime Minister, took him in his own car. They first drove to the convention center where they addressed the Indian diaspora. There were cultural performances. The Prime Minister connected with the diaspora and said you are living linkages between the two countries. The officials of the ministry were telling us that the two leaders reviewed the entire spectrum of the India-Malaysia relationship and the comprehensive strategic partnership. Discussions covered areas including trade, investments, semiconductors, defense, security, maritime, energy, renewables, tourism, cultural linkages. Several important MOUs were signed in the field of security cooperation, UN peacekeeping, semiconductors. Okay, now these visuals that we are putting out on the screens are from a little while back when these MOUs were signed in the areas of health and medicine, disaster management, containing corruption, audiovisual co-production, vocational education and social security for Indian workers were exchanged between the two sides after meetings between the two principals and their delegations.
That's right. Those are visuals of just after the press statement, the agreements that have been exchanged between India and Malaysia. Foreign Affairs expert Atul Aneja joins us now. Mr. Aneja, welcome to this special broadcast, sir. First, how do you read the outcome of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Malaysia? From tourism to technology, a very wide domain of areas have been covered to take the cooperation forward. All right, we're trying to connect with Foreign Affairs expert Atul Aneja. There seems to be some issue with the connectivity. Meanwhile, we can take a look at these visuals of agreements exchanged in diverse domains. Amrit, you were telling us
16 agreements in total. The outcomes, which, as I was saying, include areas of security cooperation, UN peacekeeping, semiconductors, health and medicine, disaster management, combating terrorism, audiovisual co-production, vocational education and social security for Indian workers.
Let's also recall some of the important points that Prime Minister made during his statement addressing the joint press. Prime Minister Modi said Malaysia is the first nation that he's paying a visit in this year, 2026. He highlighted close bond between the two nations, describing it as very special and reaffirming a commitment of both sides to broaden engagement across multiple sectors.
सिक्योरिटी के क्षेत्र में हम काउंटर टेररिज्म, इंटेलिजेंस शेयरिंग और मैरीटाइम सिक्योरिटी में सहयोग मजबूत करेंगे। हम रक्षा सहयोग को भी और व्यापक बनाएंगे। एआई और डिजिटल टेक्नोलॉजीज के साथ-साथ हम सेमीकंडक्टर, हेल्थ और फूड सिक्योरिटी में साझेदारी को आगे बढ़ाएंगे। आज आयोजित सीईओ फोरम ने ट्रेड और इन्वेस्टमेंट के नए अवसर खोले हैं। हम स्ट्रेटेजिक ट्रस्ट से इकोनॉमिक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन का रास्ता बनाएंगे।
And the Prime Minister also stressed on strong cultural ties and the importance of the Indo-Pacific and reiterated India's commitment to peace and stability in the region.
वैश्विक अस्थिरता के इस माहौल में भारत और मलेशिया की बढ़ती मित्रता दोनों देशों के लिए अत्यंत महत्वपूर्ण है। हमारा साझा मत है कि आज के चैलेंजेस का समाधान करने के लिए ग्लोबल इंस्टीट्यूशंस का रिफॉर्म बहुत जरूरी है। हम शांति के सभी प्रयासों का समर्थन करते रहेंगे और आतंकवाद पर हमारा संदेश स्पष्ट है। नो डबल स्टैंडर्ड्स, नो कॉम्प्रोमाइज। एक्सेलेंसी, भारत मलेशिया संबंधों के प्रति आपकी प्रतिबद्धता का हम सराहना करते हैं। आइए हम साथ मिलकर प्रॉस्परस मलेशिया का आपका सपना और विकसित भारत के हमारे संकल्प को साकार करें।
Taking forward the conversation on Prime Minister Modi's ongoing visit to Malaysia, today is day 2. Joining us two eminent guests, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, former senior diplomat, also would be joining us. Mr. Atul Aneja, foreign affairs expert. Ambassador Dayal, welcome to DD India. Now, your key takeaways from the outcomes that we've learned so far of Prime Minister's visit to Malaysia.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. You know, as I see it, Prime Minister Modi's visit is part of his consistent efforts to reset India-Malaysia ties. Now, let us recall that bilateral relations between India and Malaysia had reached a historic low during Mahathir Mohamad's second term from 2018 to 2020. And this was primarily because of his outspoken criticism of Indian policies. He was particularly critical of the Kashmir 370 article, then the Citizenship Amendment Act, and in addition, he had refused to extradite Zakir Naik and was very protective towards him, and this had caused friction. Now, in response, of course, India, which was then the largest importer of Malaysian palm oil, had imposed de facto trade restrictions, and Malaysian palm oil exports to India plummeted by roughly 85%, and this caused significant economic strain for Malaysia. So since then, both sides have been striving to reset the relationship, and under Mahathir Mohamad's successor governments, this reset is taking shape. Now, Prime Minister's visit is in this direction. He has tried to establish a comprehensive strategic partnership, and his visit to Kuala Lumpur has underscored a shift towards a people-first approach and long-term strategic cooperation. Let me mention that the reset is underpinned by a personal rapport between Prime Minister Modi and the Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. And significantly, both leaders sent this message across of their rapport by traveling together to public events. This was a show of unity. Prime Minister Modi, on his part, also was very supportive towards Malaysia. For instance, he expressed support to Malaysia's role in ASEAN and its bid to join BRICS. So this visit has several important aspects. I would like to emphasize some of them. And one is the impact framework. Prime Minister Modi introduced the impact vision, that is India-Malaysia partnership for advancing collective transformation. And this aims to increase the speed, scale, and reach of bilateral relationship for mutual benefit. Then, of course, there is this important aspect of cultural diplomacy. We would recall that in his speech to the Indian community, Prime Minister Modi hailed the Tamil language as an eternal and global positioning. And he positioned it as a vital establishment of the Tiruvallur Center to establish and celebrate shared heritage and the expanded OCI facilities for the Indian diaspora. Let me mention that the OCI facility is great because he has said that OCI facilities will now go back to 6 generations, which is a very significant gesture. And of course, his announcement regarding a new Indian consulate in Malaysia to better serve the nearly 3 million strong Indian community. These are some steps which he has taken, as I said, to reset the ties and strengthen the bilateral relationship.
Okay, Ambassador Dayal, this is Amrit here. You know, on terrorism, there was a very strong statement with both principals condemning terrorism unequivocally, but they called for zero tolerance on terrorism. But they agreed to counter radicalization, violent extremism, combat financing of terrorism, and prevent the use of new and emerging technologies for terrorist purposes. We've seen consistently and more so in the past the rise of radical fundamentalism or radicalization of society in or a certain part of the society in Malaysia, which is a key concern for India. Now, when both sides send this signal, do you think there is an intent to contain that, especially within Malaysia?
Well, I think Malaysia has begun to realize that terrorism anywhere is a threat to people everywhere. So, by adopting liberal policies towards certain terrorist elements in the name of Islam, I think the Malaysian government was making a huge mistake, because sooner or later these forces tend to strengthen themselves and impact the domestic framework. So, I think our Prime Minister, during his interaction with the Malaysian leaders, has emphasized that there should be zero tolerance towards terrorism. In fact, he emphasized this very clearly during his addresses. And the Malaysians, I think, are getting this point too, because their policies have tended to become tighter in regard to terrorism. Of course,
okay.
We have
Ambassador, can I stop you for a moment? These are visuals that we are getting from Kuala Lumpur, where Prime Minister is meeting the Indian National Army (INA) veterans. Some of these INA veterans, they live in Malaysia. In fact, if I can bring in Ambassador Dayal. Ambassador Dayal, did the INA veterans, find many of them settled in the Southeast Asian countries?
Well, yes, I think the INA veterans were treated with great respect by Prime Minister. And this is something that is quite natural, because they sacrificed their valuable time and made strenuous efforts for India's liberation, and many of them gave up their lives. They sacrificed their lives. So those who are still there and settled anywhere, including in Malaysia, deserve our highest appreciation. So and I think our Prime Minister has gone out of his way to do that. Let me also mention that the Prime Minister always shows the highest respect for people who are patriotic and who have served the nation. And in this context, the high regard which he has shown towards INA veterans is something that stands out.
So, just to understand historically, would they been people of Indian origin living in countries like Malaysia, which Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose recruited in his army, or were they Indians who went, fought there, then chose to stay back?
I think, from my limited understanding, that they were primarily people from India, and they decided to serve in the INA and try to liberate India from British colonialism. But of course, there is no doubt that the INA got a lot of support from Indian origin people who were settled in other countries, including in Malaysia. And Prime Minister, by emphasizing the role of the INA veteran in the shaping of India's independence movement, has done something which he is always known to do, and that is to give the highest degree of respect to people who have sacrificed so much for the country.
Sure.
Those were earlier the visuals of Prime Minister meeting the INA veterans. These visuals, of course, are of the agreements being exchanged. Mr. Atul Aneja, Foreign Affairs expert, is also joining us now. Welcome to DD India, sir. We were talking about the key takeaways of Prime Minister's ongoing visit to Malaysia. But we got these visuals of Prime Minister meeting INA veterans. Some accounts suggest that there were young recruits from the region, from Singapore, from Malaysia, then Malaya, when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was putting together the INA to fight the British. Given that both the countries, India and Malaysia, have that shared history of colonialism, how do you see the significance of this engagement?
Well, Shubhendu, it acts as it gives a specific depth to the relationship. It sort of bonds us together more, give us more rootedness. It's one vertical which comes into play in defining the historical relationship between India and Malaysia, and that gives this relationship a very special character. So this is one very important dimension. And I think taking this forward, since INA is coming to the picture, you look at the security dimension, it's sort of mutating into right now, Shubhendu. And I think that is a very, very important element. And I would even say that there is some tangential contiguity with the historical relationship. And that's one very important dimension, I think, which has become evident in Prime Minister's visit to Malaysia. This comprehensive strategic partnership, a 360-degree relationship, is taking a real root, especially given Malaysia's geography in the Indo-Pacific, Shubhendu.
Right.
If you look at this patch between to the Strait of Malacca and Malaysia, I think that's one domain in the Indo-Pacific which has come into very sharp focus during Prime Minister's visit over here. So starting from Netaji and our military sort of dimensions of the relationship to what has transpired in this relationship in the context of the comprehensive strategic partnership, I think this is really, really a big visit, and the anchoring risk specifically of India-Malaysia ties within this broader matrix of maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, I think really stands out, apart from other very, very important elements which went into defining Prime Minister's outing in Malaysia.
Atul Aneja, sir, just to understand the complexity in the region, given that Malaysia shares a comprehensive strategic partnership with India since 2024, but also with other major parts in the region, including China, given that it shares that kind of a close partnership with China, how does security of the seas, maritime openness play out?
Well, there are no zero-sum relationships anywhere. Just as Malaysia has a certain dimensional relationship with China, India too has a commercial relationship with China. So that doesn't sort of impede in any way areas of cooperation which we have.
Right.
When it comes to maritime security, I think both India and Malaysia are wedded to the safety of the sea lanes and unimpeded access in these waters. I think that's one very common area. Despite our separate bilateral engagements with China, this is one very, very key area where India and Malaysia share a very important convergence. And I think that's where they're going to cooperate big time. If you look at Shubhendu, if you see sale of Dornier aircraft, for example, yes, it's essentially for domain awareness and surveillance of this and of that particular geography. And if you look at, let's say, there was a mention by Mr. Kumaran about the defense relationship, including partnership in the Su-30. And whatever research I could do was that we've already talked about BrahMos missile being mounted on a Su-30. And specifically, if you look at the security of the sea lanes, this is a very important force multiplier which we are talking about, apart from servicing and other kind of upgradation work which India and Malaysia can do so. So frankly, if you look at the strategic domain, and specifically this particular patch of the waters in the Indo-Pacific, that's where is a very strong strategic convergence coming between India and Malaysia, apart from other areas. You talk about semiconductor, I don't want to touch on it right now. But if you look at this 360-degree relation developing, I think defense and security has really gone up the scale big time. And I specifically see that this has a geo-economic element, because when you look at free and open Indo-Pacific or safety of sea lanes, it is essentially aiding our trade and commerce, and the safety comes into picture with that. So it's a comprehensive I don't want to see the defense relationship separately from the overall relationship, strategic partnership, which has many dimensions between India and Malaysia.
Okay. Let me bring in Ambassador Dayal here. Ambassador Dayal, for all the talk on trade and investment, the bilateral trade stands at a meager $20 billion, though the potential of this is much, much more. What is stopping that from growing? And over yesterday and today, and especially today, the meetings between the two principals and their delegations, the outcomes that you see, what do you see as the road ahead when it comes to trade and investment?
Well, you're right that despite all the efforts, the bilateral trade stands at around $20 billion. But let me also mention that the two sides during Prime Minister's visit have reviewed the India-Malaysia Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement in order to address even trade imbalances and also the issue of boosting bilateral trade. So if there are very conscientious efforts that are made, then surely the trade figures will go up, bilateral trade will increase. And there are several other aspects of the relationship which will also stand to gain. For instance, as Mr. Atul Aneja was mentioning, the important aspect of the relationship is the comprehensive strategic partnership. And there, defense collaboration is one area that is being emphasized. And India is exploring the idea of selling Dornier aircraft, as Mr. Atul Aneja mentioned, and also offering maintenance support for Malaysia's Scorpene submarines and the Su-30 aircraft. So if that happens, then the economic benefits to India will be very, very much there. So in other words, there are efforts being made to bring up certain effects of the interaction to increase the trade figures. But as I mentioned during my introductory remarks, things had plummeted down because of the policies of Mahathir Mohamad. And the biggest loser, of course, was Malaysia. But since the bilateral relationship has improved, Prime Minister Modi has consciously tried to reset the relationship, then the possibilities for increasing economic cooperation and boosting bilateral trade also automatically arise.
Okay. Let me bring in Atul Aneja, Atul Amrit here. Atul, they announced the formation of something called as the India-Malaysia Digital Council. That will cover cooperation in semiconductors, DPI, fintech, emerging technologies. There is a lot of scope when it comes to semiconductors for cooperation. Malaysia is pretty advanced in production of semiconductors, and we have our own strengths about design of chips, etc. So it's a natural progression that this cooperation could see a steep incline.
Amrit, the important part is alternate supply chains. I think that is the thematic line which knits all these initiatives together. Now, if you really look at it, when it comes to India and India's vision on semiconductors, I mean, right now it is on fabrication and designing and talent. So I think that is something which India has, is India's USP. Now, once you have the fabrication designing, somebody has to mass produce it. And that's where Malaysia comes in, because 13% of the world's assembly, testing and packaging, they call it ATD, is being done in Malaysia.
Okay.
So now you transfer the fabrication element into it and get into Malaysia for ATD. And from here, the third element of the supply chain, right now we have India, Malaysia, third element will be Singapore for logistics and then taking it forward to the rest of the world. So I think the agreement on semiconductors is to do with this alternate supply chains. Now, if you see, these are all friendly countries coming together when it comes to semiconductors. Now, where do other countries come in? Other countries or geographies? Let's say Taiwan. Taiwan and India are collaborating on fabrication part, which is India's strength, but that's a partnership which is going on. But at some point, it could even be Malaysia, because Amrit, I just want to draw your attention that there is an advanced semiconductor academy in Malaysia which has signed a MOU on R&D with IIT Madras. This happened in 2025, which is on innovation, talent cultivation. So at some point, what TMSC of Taiwan is doing, perhaps India and Malaysia will also be doing it. So you're getting a supply chain network coming into place, which also has inbuilt dynamism in it. So I think that is where the India-Malaysia relationship really gets on the semiconductor domain. And then that's one vertical. And then, of course, DPI and other aspects of the digital economy come into it. And frankly, Amrit, one element which comes into it, if you want to do this, you want to have these digital corridors, then you have to have secure digital corridors. And that's where the third element comes in, which is cybersecurity.
Okay.
Where you have to secure the infrastructure you're building. And my final point here, Amrit, is that this is a relationship which is being built for the future. You can't compare it to what happened in the past. Now, we are living in a world of diversification. India signs with the EU a trade agreement. With the British, we sign something. With the UAE, we have another area of agreement, including free trade. And here, Malaysia also comes in.
Right.
Right. I think we've lost the video link with Atul. We'll try and reconnect there.
Right. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, if I can come to you on the question of boosting trade, what is the manner in which we can see India's engagement with Malaysia, also an extension of India's outreach and engagement with the ASEAN? Malaysia was also the chair of ASEAN last year, 2025. This year and the earlier months, we've seen a very interesting momentum that India has maintained in trade diplomacy. The mother of all deals with EU has been signed. The deal with America is taking shape. However, the trade with ASEAN over the years hasn't yielded the kind of result that one would have expected. Just to see the bigger picture, how does this close engagement with Malaysia also help with things vis-a-vis the ASEAN grouping?
One reason, very frankly, why India's trade with the ASEAN countries didn't grow very rapidly was because we didn't join the India-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. And the reason for that, of course, was that there were concerns that Chinese products would be marketed to India through some ASEAN countries. But nonetheless, there are very strenuous bilateral efforts which are being made to boost the economic relationship. And let me mention that our bilateral engagements are very, very well thought out. For instance, in the case of Prime Minister's visit to Malaysia, the fact that he took part in the 10th India-Malaysia CEO Forum was very significant, because this meeting naturally focused on new investment areas such as semiconductors, renewable energy, and startups. So this is a very, very effective way of engaging with the business community of the other countries by reaching out to them through your own business community. And the CEOs can play a very, very significant role in this regard. Then, of course, as was mentioned earlier during the discussion, Prime Minister Modi announced that India's UPI digital payment system will soon be available in Malaysia. And naturally, this will be a step forward in enhancing the economic relationship. Now, let me also mention that India, on its part, has made several gestures to Malaysia. For instance, India lifted, despite the export ban on rice, India decided to provide 200,000 metric tons of non-basmati rice as a gesture of goodwill to Malaysia. So this gesture is not going to be unnoticed. And I think that it is going to promote more understanding and a spirit of cooperation. So when the spirit of cooperation is there, the trade relationship also grows. But as I mentioned, during, for instance, the period 2018 to 2020, when Mahathir Mohamad was the Prime Minister, the understanding and the spirit of goodwill had deteriorated to such an extent that naturally trade relations also suffered. But now the effort of our Prime Minister has been to rebuild trust, to rebuild goodwill, and by doing so, he's creating the atmosphere which is required for promoting trade and economic relations also.
Ambassador Prabhudyal, Mr. Neja, do stay with us as we take forward this conversation. Let's take a look at some of the key points made by the Malaysian Prime Minister. PM Anwar Ibrahim lauded Prime Minister Modi's peace efforts at global front. Said exchanges with Prime Minister Modi is not a diplomatic, rather than exchange between friends. Let's listen.
In my discussions with Prime Minister Modi, it is not just an normal pious platitudes and diplomatic exchanges. It is an exchange between true friends, full of trust and understanding. And therefore, I must also take this opportunity to express my regards and thanks to him for his firm commitment to support all peace efforts throughout the world, be it in Ukraine, Russia, or in the case of the Middle East, and particularly in Gaza. His commitment to support the peace process is unequivocal. And I must therefore express my appreciation. And as a sign of our good relations, I immediately have agreed to support the decision of the government of India to open a consulate of India in Kota Kinabalu, Sabah.
And the Malaysian Prime Minister also said that India is growing by leaps and bounds. Malaysia wants to increase its trade with India.
India is growing by leaps and bounds. It's one spectacular rise in the international economic and trade scene. And therefore, Malaysia, in the ASEAN context, would certainly benefit immensely if we could secure more ways and opportunities to collaborate with India, to extending beyond the $18.59 billion that we achieved in 2025.
And taking forward the conversation, come to you, Mr. Atullah Neja. Sir, one can't help but notice the kind of warmth that the two leaders share. On more than one occasion, the two leaders talk about their personal rapport and friendship. On day one, we also saw Prime Minister Ibrahim present in person at the airport to receive Prime Minister Modi. We talk about the resetting of ties between India and Malaysia. What is the role that not just the shared vision, but this personal rapport that the two leaders seem to share have to play?
I think, Shubhendra, this is very important because, objectively, you may have conditions for strategic partnership with many countries. But unless there is that X factor provided to it by the leaderships, by the individual leaders, it may not go as far or realize its full potential. I think this is very, very important that we do not see the agreements which we assign or areas of convergence, but to see the personal rapport and the investment made by both the leaders, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, into that. The special gesture of coming to the airport and receiving Prime Minister is not only personal regard for the Prime Minister, but a commitment, a very deep commitment to the relationship with India. And that makes me feel very hopeful that, we've in this geography, we have found a strategic partner. And not only that, Shubhendu, I think it's important that this relationship no longer remains personality based alone. Even if chips go down, as Ambassador Dayal was saying, that in case of when Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, it went down. But if you have structural linkages, interdependence, supply chains integration, I think that gives a relationship a very strong robustness. And I think that's the insurance policy which is embedded in this prime ministerial relationship, because we are structurally getting connected now. So taking this relationship, which started in 2024 as a comprehensive strategic partnership, it's getting its sort of anchors and roots now. And that is what makes it very different. And it's taking place, Shubhendu, in a very different and difficult geopolitical context of uncertainty. That India now is moving into specific anchors in the global system. I just want to make one more point about the Malaysian Prime Minister's speech. You know, when he thanks the Prime Minister or lauds him for his peace efforts, I mean, he's looking at the Prime Minister not in bilateral terms, but in international terms as one of the global leaders of our times, if not the statesman of our time. I think that's a very, very important message which goes. And frankly, I heard Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim
Mr.
himself.
Taneja, we'll interrupt you for a moment. We're getting those visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting with people of Indian origin on day 2 of his Malaysia visit. These are a set of Malaysian senators, ministers and other who trace back their roots to India. Those visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting notable PIOs, or people of Indian origin, in Malaysia. This is day 2 of Prime Minister's ongoing visit to Malaysia.
These are people who would have, migrated centuries back, 6-7 generations ago. In fact, the diaspora, if you put the PIOs, people of Indian origin, and non-resident Indians living in Malaysia, they are the second largest diaspora, Indian diaspora, anywhere in the world outside India. So these are people of Indian origin which the Prime Minister met today. They form about 7%, the Indian community forms about 7% of the Malaysian population. They are very entrenched, they are well entrenched in the Malaysian society. Many of them people in all walks of life, businessmen in industry, in politics, many of them are parliamentarians. Many of them are working in the technology field. So people, these are people of Indian origin that the Prime Minister is meeting. These visuals that you see on your television screens.
Malaysia is home to some 3 million strong Indian diaspora. As Amrit mentioned, it's one of the largest, the second largest in fact in the world. Malaysia is home to people of Indian origin, Indian diaspora, all put together. Those visuals of members of the community calling on, greeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is day 2 of Prime Minister's visit. Mr. Taneja, the point you were making, if you could complete it, even as we play the visuals of Prime Minister meeting members of the Indian diaspora, the PIOs in particular. Mr. Taneja.
I was talking about the Malaysian Prime Minister's remarks about Prime Minister Modi's role in peace efforts globally. So the visualization of Prime Minister Modi is not just in a bilateral context, but in an international context as a problem solver of many of the global problems. I think that is important. The way Prime Minister Ibrahim looks at Prime Minister Modi. And, you know, these are leaders. I have heard Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim in the Indian Council of World Affairs when he came to India last, and in Russia at the SPIF, the St. Petersburg conference. He too is a leader who doesn't think in terms of local terms. I mean, he has a global vision as well. So these are the new, as world transitions, these are the kind of leaders which are emerging, you know, strong on their strategic autonomy, looking at the global stage, and in a difficult global situation, trying to find anchors of stability by cooperating with each other. So that's the point I was trying to make, Shubhendu.
Okay, Ambassador Dayal, if I could bring you in those visuals. Now the visuals that we're playing is of the delegation level talks, but earlier visuals of the Prime Minister interacting with the PIOs or people of persons of Indian origin. Yesterday we saw him go at the community event. During his speech he said, "You are the living bridge between the two countries." What role does the diaspora, Ambassador, play? What role does the community play in strengthening linkages between the two countries?
You know, the Indian diaspora in different countries plays a very key role in strengthening the friendship. And the Prime Minister highlighted this when he referred to the Indian diaspora as the living bridge between India and Malaysia. Now, let me mention that in my 37-year-long diplomatic career, I never saw any Indian Prime Minister exhibit the sort of outreach to the Indian community as Prime Minister Modi has done. You know, wherever he goes, he makes it a point to meet the Indian community, to address them. And these gatherings which have been organized for the Indian community where he addresses them have been huge. And the Prime Minister has won the hearts of the Indian diaspora without exception. So he has emphasized the role which they play through his outreach to them. Let me also mention that not all sections of the diaspora are so well off. They are not businessmen. For instance, in the Gulf countries, the majority of Indians are workers. And generally they go neglected. But you know, when Prime Minister visited Kuwait last year, and incidentally, no Prime Minister had visited Kuwait since Mrs. Indira Gandhi paid a visit there. So Prime Minister Modi not only addressed the Indian community, but he made it a point to visit the labor camps. He spent time with the humble workers. And that was a very, very important gesture because he underlined how they are playing a role in their own humble manner in strengthening the relationship because they are regarded as very useful by, for instance, the Kuwaitis there. So his outreach to the Indian community certainly emphasizes the importance which he attaches to them. And this is evident from the sort of response that he gets. You know, the Indian community also responds with huge fervor and enthusiasm. So he has won the hearts of the Indian community. And this is a very significant factor. And I hope it is continued in the years to come. Because, as I said earlier, the Indian community is of great importance in strengthening the bilateral relationship.
Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, staying with that idea of the importance of the Indian diaspora, Indian community across the world, in Malaysia in this case, is it also important to note the kind of perspective that Prime Minister brings vis-a-vis the Indian community abroad? It's not just the traditional perspective of brain drain, people who left for greener pastures, but active linkages which have a role to play in the larger vision of developed India. In his address to the diaspora on day one, he talks about the kind of role that Indian diaspora can play. We're getting some bites, sir. We'll listen to that first.
This is an INA veteran who's speaking.
The Prime Minister was looking so young, and he could recollect the past of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, with whom I had the pleasure of meeting, and I was even garlanded by him. And we were talking about the progress of India since the early days, and I quite humbly congratulated the Prime Minister for being firm and developing India in many areas, caring for the villages of India, building toilets, taking care, providing for their health, and again then of course being strong, how strongly he is concentrating on the economic development of India.
We were listening to an INA veteran sharing his experience of engaging with Prime Minister. Wonderful memories.
Imagine being garlanded by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and
yes.
decades later
Yes.
meeting a Prime Minister.
And to be able to share that memory as if it is so fresh. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, the point that I was trying to make was the manner in which Prime Minister invokes a direct participation of the diaspora when he says they have a role to play in realizing the vision of developed India. Also, if we look at the key takeaways of the exchanges that have happened between the two leaders, there's a lot for people to people connect, from tourism, in technology, to even social security for Indian workers working in Malaysia. So in that sense, there is an active engagement for not just who are going outside of India and working, but who are staying, and generations are growing up outside of India. There's a direct active engagement and connection that is being worked on.
I think the Prime Minister has been able to emphasize this very important aspect. You can take an Indian origin person out of India, but you can't take India out of that person. India remains in their hearts, and that is how, the warmth which we see on your screen is exhibiting in terms of the affection shown to Prime Minister Modi. And there is an old saying, if you want to get love, you have to give love. The Prime Minister showers his affection, his attention, and that of course comes back because the community in different countries also does the same. So this bridge of friendship which Prime Minister Modi has steadily built with the Indian diaspora in different countries is very significant. And even Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim acknowledged the role that the Indian diaspora has played in Malaysia, and he made it a point to join hands with Prime Minister in strengthening the bonds which exist through the Diaspora between the two countries.
Okay. Let me bring in Atul Aneja. Atul, to staying on the issue of diaspora and the cultural, historical, civilizational linkages, the diaspora, of course, as Ambassador Dayal was saying, the outreach that this Prime Minister has shown, or the visible outreach to the diaspora, but does it, apart from the soft power, apart from the influence, apart from the dances, apart from the Bollywood, the cinema, the textiles, the festivals, does it accrue some hard benefits for India?
Absolutely, Amit. So if you look at it, diaspora varies. The first point that Prime Minister Modi has leveraged the diaspora like no other Prime Minister or Indian leader has done. There is no denying about it. Now, if you look at geographically, if you look at Caribbean countries, for example, the diaspora there is in leadership positions. So, engaging on the diaspora platform as well adds that X factor to the political relationship and the political and economic relationship, the hard benefits which we get out of it. Then, you take countries like Fiji or Papua New Guinea, Mauritius. I mean, this has been a cautious policy of the Prime Minister. Now, what happens is that many of these individuals, for example, the business community. I spent some time in Dubai, and there's business councils which have the ear to the leadership of their leadership. So they become bridges or sort of the voice of India in very subtle and indirect ways with the leadership of that country. So it pays big time. The third thing is that you look at what Ambassador Dayal was saying about Indian workers. The third element is also paying tribute to these humble workers. You're getting 69 or 70 billion dollars of remittances coming mainly through their efforts. It's a big tribute. They deserve respect and tribute, and the Prime Minister does it. So behind all the soft power, etc., which you talked about, are very tangible benefits you get out of engagement with the diaspora. You may not call it specific lobbies as such, but indirect influence of these individuals is enormous on the political relationship between India and the respective country. And the final point I want to make is, we talked about geopolitics, geostrategic, geoeconomic, but geocultural. I think this is something which is a new dimension altogether. The fact that we are culturally knitted, if you look at the geography he is going into, right up to Cambodia, Vietnam, to India, and then on the western seaboard, Central Asia. I mean, this is a very important dimension of Indian diplomacy which has come into the fore, which I thought I'd like to mention.
Okay. Let me bring in Ambassador Dayal. Ambassador Dayal, I want to ask you something, and I ask this to you with utmost respect. Did reaching out to the diaspora, as you said, the Prime Minister, But did he tell your service too? Did he tell the bureaucracy to be more responsive to the diaspora's needs? Has something changed there? Rather than just staying to the ICCSR centers and teaching Bharatanatyam or Hindi, did he? Was there some effort on that front too?
Let me say that the Indian diplomats posted abroad have always been very sensitive to the needs of the community, and respective governments have taken measures in regard to the welfare of the community. But, and this is a fundamental but, the sort of outreach from the very top that we witness now was perhaps rare. Because look at the visuals on your screen, look at the showcasing of Indian culture. It is not correct to underplay India's soft play in this regard. India's cultural diplomacy through its diaspora, which is being showcased on your screen right now, is very important because it's a bridge which has outlasted centuries. And if the Indian community, which migrated to, for instance, places like Malaysia or even elsewhere in the world, like Fiji, for instance, or in the Caribbean islands, if they have kept alive their cultural traditions, this is a fact that India has been leveraging, particularly in recent years, with great emphasis because they are becoming a bond of friendship between the countries where they live and the country of their origin. So, as I said, while always the government of India was very sensitive towards the needs of the community, but this outreach and the effort to respect the community and to look after it has increased. For instance, Prime Minister has opened so many different consulates in different parts of the world. For instance, when I was posted in the US, we had only 5 consulates. Now there are many, many more. And this is because the increase in the number of consulates.
In fact, he announced one more consulate in Malaysia during this visit.
Yes, that would make it easier for people living in that region to reach out to the consulate and seek assistance. So, government's outreach has been emphasized in a number of ways, including by the opening of new consulates and certain other gestures. For instance, the Prime Minister announced that while till now up to 4 generations of Indian origin people in Malaysia were entitled to OCIs, now this would be increased to 6 generations. So this is a heartwarming gesture, and certainly people are going to take notice of it. So by strengthening the bonds with the community, the Prime Minister has been able to leverage their role in strengthening the relationship with the respective countries.
Mr. Aneja, just to understand the significance of India-Malaysia partnership in the larger geopolitics as well, at a time of growing protectionism in different parts of the world, Prime Minister, and I quote him from the talk that he delivered with the Diaspora, he says, India's success is Malaysia's success, is Asia's success. Then he presents his vision of impact India-Malaysia partnership for advancing collective transformation. And today in the press statements also, both the leaders acknowledge that this friendship is operating in a very larger problematic world. So in that sense, how do we read the significance of what is going on just between 2 countries, but its implications for the larger world order?
Shubhendu, you hit the nail on the head that in this problematic world, we are looking for anchors of stability, both from the geopolitical and geoeconomic dimensions. Prime Minister himself mentioned the signing of the FTA with the European Union. So you put one anchor in Europe, a very strong one over there, and it insulates you from headwinds which may come from another geography. Then, if you look at the visit of the UAE Crown Prince the other day in New Delhi, 2 hours visit, great strategic importance. You have seen UAE as another anchor, which seems to be in the GCC, divided world as I see it after the Gaza conflict. You placed your anchor over there. And if you look on the eastern seaboard here, I really see in that context that Malaysia is coming into the picture. as again a strategic anchor, because the world power has diffused. It's multipolar. Too many headwinds are coming from all directions. So India, in its own self-interest, needs to drive those anchors. So I think this visit, I agree with you completely that it is not just a bilateral kind of a visit which benefits India and Malaysia, but it has a much bigger footprint. And if you look at this geography, as I said in the beginning, if you look at how close Malaysia is to the Malacca Straits, I mean, I'm not sure about the exact figure, but I think about 25 to 30%, if not more, of global trade is passing through the Strait of Malacca.
Right.
And if India and Malaysia can work together through their doniers and other ways of, let's say, stopping piracy in this particular geography, it will be a benefit to international trade. So it's going far beyond it. In fact, alternate supply chains, semiconductors, it's not just India and Malaysia, for example, who are going to benefit out of it. I mean, if India's participation in a global supply chain is by definition which benefits far beyond the bilateral, if not, and definitely international. So the vision here is far bigger than the bilateral. And it is definitely regional, and in certain aspects, it is global, and it is to be seen with the other parallel initiatives which we have been taking, especially after Trump's tariffs, to be honest. And I think that's the dynamic. It has set in a certain dynamic into Indian foreign policy, and this is one example of it, an important example of it. That is the Prime Minister's visit to Malaysia and the agreements which are being signed.
Okay. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal and Atul Aneja, I request you to stay on. We'll have to slip into a short commercial break. We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away.